All right. Um, well, we're returning to the Old Testament. Um, and I think I said last week uh, that the Book of Ruth it's really uh, one of my favorites, and it's probably because it is one of the most mistranslated books in the Bible. And in many ways, Ruth uh, has taken a bad rap, and we won't get to that until we get to chapter 3. Um, otherwise, this is a great story. Okay, um, and as we as we go through this, um, read the scriptures, and there is lots of cultural stuff, lots of learning. I mean, it's kind of like it's kind of like fine details in some ways, but there's lots here, and um, and since we say that we teach the spirit of the word, um, we need to keep in mind as we're reading this. Uh, just keep in mind the 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 hearts and the minds of Naomi and Ruth, and just kind of identify with their situations. And I think, and this will read. Um, Dr. Eric always said, read, especially the Old Testament, read it like a novel. And so we're going to start the novel tonight with the Book of Ruth. And oops, hold on. Okay, so George, you want to read scripture again tonight?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man from Bethlehem of Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Amalek, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons, Malion and Chalion, Ephrates from Bethlehem of Judah. And they came to the land of Moab to sojourn there.
Okay, so we're going to do a good bit of background here, and hopefully, I learned a lot, and hopefully, we'll all learn a lot from this. All right, so we have a little map here, and um, you notice we have the two kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, and just a little bit about that. These days, that is all Israel, okay, but um, uh, the 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 kingdom of, well, it was, it wasn't a it was like, it was Israel as we know now, but after King David, after King Solomon, they split. So so you have the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah down here. And of course, the kingdom of Judah has Jerusalem, and you see, I put Bethlehem in here. Bethlehem is kind of not real far from Jerusalem, but it is a little south. And so um, so they left uh, Judah. They living in Judah, and they went to the kingdom of Moab, which is right over here. Now, just a little side notes here. You notice there's the kingdom of Moab and the kingdom of Ammon. Okay, Ammon and Moab were the two sons of Lot. You remember the story of Lot, and Lot fled Sodom and Gomorrah, and he had two sons incestuously. Okay, that's what a lot of people like to stick in here, because he did have those two sons by his two daughters. But so they were descendants of Abraham, but the Moabites, and I say the Hebrews here, but they were enemies. Okay, they had a lot of border disputes, whatever. And let's not forget that they were not, their religion was pagan, and the their they worshipped a god named Shemosh. So so when we're looking at Ruth, all right, Ruth was a Moabite, and that is where she grew up. I'm not sure, but I read, I always read lots of other versions and stuff, but seemingly Ruth was well off in the land of Moab. But anyway, so that's where that's about the Moabites. Now let's look at the situation. Uh, okay, famine. Now in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, famine was common, and so famine is a situation in which a substantial proportion of the population of a country or region are unable to access adequate food. And like I say, it was not uncommon. During famines and natural catastrophes, Near Easterners forgot their political and religious differences and extended their hospitality both to their friends and their enemies. Who knows, they said, today you need me, tomorrow I may need you. Now, when we're talking about hospitality here, remember, we've talked to this many times in the Bible study. Hospitality was a tradition, and that tradition has been around for years, still is around. And that tradition said that no matter if someone is your enemy, it doesn't matter, you will show them hospitality. And the instances, normally they would take in the enemy or anybody for 3 days, and they came under the protection of the roof where they were staying, even though they were enemies. And if you go back to the story of Lot, it all happens there too. But just remember, even the Moabites weren't part of the Jewish religion, the Hebrew religion, but they still had, that was culture, and they had that same culture, hospitality, and that hospitality remains today. So, and there was plenty of food in Moab. The land of Moab depended on heavy dew for irrigation. Therefore, the Moabites were willing to extend a helpful hand to a people who were perishing because of a long drought and famine. And one thing I will say about this, I to put the background of the desert here on these pictures. And if you were to go to Israel and what this is called Judah, when you saw on the map, it's the southern part of Israel. And honestly, it's no wonder. I mean, it is desert and rocks, and that's, I mean, that's really that's really what it is. And of course, they were subject to droughts, and water was not ever plentiful either. So that's the situation that Naomi and her husband were in, and they went to to Moab to live. Okay, and just for the period of the judges, that's what they say when this story, it took place during the period of the judges, and that was from 1150 to 1050 BC, about 25 years. Okay, go ahead, George.
And Amalek, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the Moabite women, and the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years, and Malion and Chalion, her 2 sons, died. And the woman was bereft of her husband and her 2 sons.
Not a good situation for Naomi. But let's look at this. Okay, so the family, all right. When it said before, it was talking about the Ephrathites, and the tribe of Ephraim, that was one of the 12. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. One of the 12 tribes. And so Naomi and her husband were descendants of Ephraim. And interesting, okay, so Elimelech, Naomi's husband, we had Elimelech and Naomi. So just interesting about the name, okay? The name Elimelech means my God is king. Now, if you look at it, I didn't break it down, but you see the first 2 letters is EL. And whenever you see EL, that means God. And then what you see a form of the word for king is Malka, but you see it's Melech, same thing, and that's how the name, it's my God is king. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. All right. Okay, George.
Then she started with her daughters-in-law to return from the land of Moab, where she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she went forth out of the place where they sojourned, along with her 2 daughters-in-law, to return and go to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, return, go back to your own country and to the house of your kinsmen. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with me and with both of my sons who now are dead. The Lord grant you favor so that you may find rest in the house of your parents. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept.
All right. So what we So what we have here, we have Naomi and Ruth and Orpah. Naomi was in a foreign land. There were no men in her life. And let's understand here that in the ancient Near East, um, you had to have a man and come under a man's roof, because there was no other way to support. Women essentially were traded, and bought, and so so Naomi was in that strange land, with nowhere to turn. She was a widow, and Ruth, of course, was too, but we'll see. Now, she heard, okay, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. Belief systems, the Lord did was responsible for all good things and all bad things, and um, so the evidently the drought had ceased, and there was food in Judah, and of course she would want to go home because she had no kinsman, no anything in Moab. Now, okay, I said before that the Book of Ruth was one of the most mistranslated, and of course we study the Bible here. I need to start mentioning it more, using what's called the seven keys. And the seven keys, one of them is the Aramaic language, and it's actually just the translation, the differences in translation, from the King James to the Lanza Bible. And so I've got these I've got these two verses here, and I thought we would read them and show that you could see the difference, because I think if we need to bring out these differences occasionally, because well, for many reasons, but people don't realize how even the translation of one word can really change the story. And so what we have here is not necessarily something real earth-shaking, but it will show you the differences in the translation. So I'm going to read the KJV, and then I have George read Lambda. So the King James, it says, "And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Little difficulty understanding that, and quite different from Lamsa. Go ahead, George.
And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, Return, go back to your own country and to the house of your kinsmen. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with me and with both of my sons, who now are dead. The Lord grant you favor so that you may find rest in the house of your parents. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept.
Okay, now we go back to the traditions, and the law essentially, but the traditions. Okay, if a woman, if a woman, in this case, the woman lost her husband died. In other cases, their their spouses uh, ignored the laws and could just put them out or whatever. But they could go back to their parents, and that was the tradition, that they would go back to their parents. Um, and in the King James up there, they would not go back to the house of her husband, of their husbands. That that was not the tradition. But again, the translation and knowing, like I say, Dr. Lamsa knew the context of what, and he knew the meaning of the words. So, um, so technically, they would go back to the house of their parents, and then you see where verse 8, and it says, "Go, return each to her mother's house." That's really a bad translation, because women didn't have house, they didn't own property, and they were never referred to as a woman's house, a mother's house. So, but that's the way the translations work. Now, just something interesting, okay? I was I was something I was looking at something completely different with some other people, and they used the NIV, and that um, the NIV, um, we were doing something with Psalms or something, and so they had the NIV, which I don't usually look at, um, because the whole Lamsa and the commentaries all compare with the KJV, but that day, and it had to do with the psalm, and it was, I mean, it was different. I mean, it was totally different meaning. Okay, and so I thought, well, I'll just do the NIV here, and this is, I mean, this does not make sense culturally either, because the NIV says, "May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Um, I mean, that's a nice, approach to say something, but um, but it I mean, they would not, um, they would go back to their parents, and they may or may not get another husband or whatever. So anyway, I just I just did that because I I never realized, and the differences, you see that they're different from, even from the King James. So I don't know. I may start looking at NIV too, just to, you know. But our translation just comes from the background, and the translation, of course, from Dr. Lamsa, who spoke Aramaic, uh, um, knew the language, uh, and knew the context of things and how to interpret it. Okay, go ahead, George.
And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your land and to your people." But Naomi said to them, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Will I bear sons again that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, and even if I should have a husband, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? No, my daughters, for I am greatly grieved for your sakes, and it grieves me more than it does you, because the hand of the Lord is gone forth against me."
Okay, now let's go back. Let's go back to um, what Naomi said. She said, "I am too old to have a husband." Well, again, that relates to the culture of the time. Um, if you, in this case, she wasn't barren. I mean, she had 2 sons, but now she essentially cannot have any more children, and that's why she says she will not have a husband, because um, uh, it the idea is a woman who has no children, um, or is barren, is really, it was considered just, I mean, worthless. And some they might have, but in this case, she was a widow, and she was not going to have another husband because technically she couldn't bear children. And I mean, I know about Sarah and all that, but for this situation, that's what she was. That's what she was facing. Um, and she was, um, she really, she wanted the best. She wanted the best for her daughters-in-laws. She really did, and she was going to go back, and she would do whatever she could, but she would at least be in a land of uh, her own religion, and she would be around other people that knew her and kinsmen. So, and once again, technically, um, the wealthy, the wealthy people were supposed to take care of the widows and the orphans, and the poor. They were supposed to do that. Um, and when you read the Bible, sometimes they didn't. But okay, so the next, um, the next thing she says, the hand of the Lord is gone forth against me. Now we get to belief systems here. Um, when I think we've talked about this before. Now the belief system was that God was responsible, for everything good, everything bad. Um, and remember, we talked about they revered God. God was mysterious. They revered him. They could not see him. There was no image. They could not see him and whatnot, but they revered him. And for the most part, um, they 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 followed they followed God, and so was Ruth doing that. But the belief system was, okay, if you were sick or somebody died, whatnot, then God was punishing Naomi, even though she didn't know, and we don't know how they died. But back then it didn't matter. It was, well, God has had something against Naomi, which of course is what she believed, and but the one thing about it is that is what she believed and whatnot, but she never lost her faith. Okay, George, last.
And they lifted up their voices again and wept. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and turned back and went away. But Ruth clung to her. And her mother-in-law said to her, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her kinsmen. Return also after your sister-in-law. And Ruth said to her, far be it from me to return from the following after you, and to leave you. For where you go, I will go, and where you dwell, I will dwell. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if even death can separate me from you. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, then she ceased from urging her to go back.
Okay, now this is the good part of Ruth, and this part and this chapter is is touted because of Ruth's um, devotion. Uh, to Naomi, her mother-in-law. And remember, Ruth grew up as the Moabite. She didn't know anything about the God of Israel, the one God, whatever. She grew up with, pagan religion. They sacrificed to God, and actually they were part of people that sacrificed humans, sacrificed children. So that's how she had grown up. But she married Naomi's son, and Naomi was a very kind, uh, um, caring person, and Ruth became attached to her. Um, she she learned and accepted the one God of Israel, and so this part is a good part. Okay, but so Naomi had been both a mother-in-law and a mother to Ruth and Orpah. Her Hebrew conduct, kindness, and way of life had endeared her to both of her daughters-in-law. Naomi had been a light shining in the dark, pagan Moabite town. Ruth and Orpah were unwilling to part from Naomi. So a very close relationship, and for a mother-in-law, um, you know, that's might not be something we see a lot of today. But Ruth was so attached to Naomi that nothing short of death could separate her from her loving mother-in-law. And this is the good point here. Ruth was willing to give up her gods, religion, and customs of her country in exchange for living close to a faithful and caring mother-in-law. Okay. So this Naomi's situation. All right. She was in a foreign land with no kinsmen, no means of support, but she had faith in the God of Israel that the famine was over in Judah. And of course, God was responsible for ending that famine. And then through her faith, kindness, and love, Naomi influenced Ruth. Ruth became loyal to the God of Israel and Naomi. So this is the first part. And um, of course, I thank you ever so much for our contributions. And now, um, as I was reading this again, I've read it many times, but every time I read, whether it's Ruth or anybody else, every time I read it again, there's something jumps out, and so I'm going to just put this. Does that not sound like Jesus' teachings? Um, you know, when okay, what and it just seems like it wasn't a coincidence. Well, that Naomi and her husband went to Moab. I think that she was guided to go there, just like we all do, and that's the message. That's Jesus' teaching. She was guided to go there. Um, she and again, she never lost her faith. She never lost that connection to God, and I mean, it was really devastating things, that her husband would die and then her sons, but she continued, and following the guidance came back to Judah. And so that's just I'm putting that out there to you. Uh, to me, it's a great example of what Jesus was trying to teach.